And now for a response from the other side, let's bring in Democratic strategist Kevin Walling. He has close ties to the Biden campaign leadership. Kevin, always good to see you. You just heard the other side of the president's campaign. Clearly, they want to prosecute this case in court, despite the fact that Joe Biden is now the president-elect. I know you talked to the members of the Biden campaign. You got insight there. Do they plan to continue, Kevin, the ground game on the ground in the states, making sure the votes are counted, making sure this process goes forward, despite the fact that this election has been called in his favor?
Absolutely, Trace. We want every vote to be counted across each of these states, to Harmeet's point, because we want to make it abundantly clear that Joe Biden is the president-elect of this country, duly elected in all of these battleground states that are being called, as well as Kamala Harris is the vice president-elect. So we will adjudicate this starting tomorrow, responding to whatever lawsuits the Trump campaign files. But again, as the networks have called it, as more departments have called it, we are seeing the same kind of votes coming out of these key counties, making sure that the vice president is now the president-elect.
You also say you have friends in the Trump campaign and they're scrambling. And you say they're scrambling because they don't have one unifying figure to take this fight forward, pointing to someone like James Baker, who did that for President Bush back in 2000. Baker, by the way, says this, James Baker quoting here, "There are huge differences between then and now. For one thing, our whole argument was that the voters have been counted and they've been counted and they've been counted and it's time to end the process." That's not exactly the message that I heard on election night. And so I think it's pretty hard to be against counting the votes there. What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Trace. And to former Secretary Baker's point, George Bush was leading in Florida. That's not the condition here that we're seeing in 2020, where the vice president, now President-elect Joe Biden, is leading in all these key battleground states. That is operating not from a deficit, but from a point of power in terms of going to these courts. And again, you asked Harmeet, Sandra asked Harmeet for multiple instances of fraud, and she couldn't produce any examples of that just yet. You have Bob Casey, Republican senator of Pennsylvania, no fan of Joe Biden, who's saying there is no evidence of fraud. You have Republican officials in Georgia saying there's no evidence of fraud. So again, this is a desperate last-minute attempt by Donald Trump and his campaign to reverse the will of the American people, and I don't think it will be successful.
Well, I mean, the Trump campaign just said, look, here's the deal. We believe there is fraud. We believe there's widespread fraud, and we plan to bring that to court. And when we file these in court, you can read it there. That's on their side. We talk about, unifying figures like former Secretary James Baker. There's word now, our White House correspondent John Roberts saying that, maybe they're looking, the Trump campaign, at somebody like Michael Mukasey, the former Attorney General under Bush. What are your thoughts on someone like that coming in, heavy hitter, maybe giving this thing a lot more credibility? Your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I do think, someone with more credibility than a Rudy Giuliani might be more successful in terms of advocating for the Trump campaign. But again, I think that card has left the station here with regards to trying to reverse any of these numbers. It's much more difficult, as you know, Trace, from a legal perspective, to actually throw at votes once they've been tabulated and once they've been counted. So regardless of who they get from a level of experience, I think it's just not an upward battle that they're going to be successful with.
I wonder if the pressure starts to mount. I mean, you have people like Lindsey Graham kind of coming out and saying, at least acknowledging that Joe Biden is the president-elect. And we've had reports there are some internal battles in the White House, maybe some saying the president should consider conceding here. Do you think the pressure over the next couple of days rises, Kevin?
Sure, I think it will certainly be mounting. Now, of course, we know, Trace, in your reporting over the last 4 years, there's not a lot of outside pressure that actually motivates Donald Trump to do one thing or the other. So that's going to be him and his conscience to come forward, whether he wants to be a uniting figure in the ending months and days of his presidency or not. But again, the American people have spoken pretty clearly, as Bret Baier had said earlier, that this is a clarion call. This is a very clear call for Joe Biden to be the president-elect. And regardless of what the president does, Joe Biden will be inaugurated on January 20th.
Kevin Walling, always good to see you, sir. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great, Trace. Good to be with you.
Yep. Sandra.
And thank you, Trace. Live